a hot streak, but now they are set for a little road stand that begins in Morgantown against the Mountaineers. We'll preview West Virginia once again coming up on today's Locked On Texas Tech.
You are Locked On Texas Tech, your daily podcast on the Texas Tech Red Raiders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Texas Tech, a member of the Locked On Podcast Network. Thank you for making Locked On Texas Tech your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms. I'm Ryan Mainville. I cover Texas Tech for the Dallas Morning News. I'm joined by Emery Lida, a longtime Texas Tech analyst and writer. Today, man, it feels strange to be previewing a road game, but we're going to do it anyways. Texas Tech is heading back on the road for the first time since when they went to the Fog, and they've got their first back-to-back road games of the season, which is kind of crazy to be talking about that at the beginning of February. And they are going to Morgantown to play the Mountaineers. Obviously, Texas Tech has seen this team before. The Red Raiders won pretty convincingly, 78-65 at the USA. And, you know, it's a Bob Huggins team. They're tough, and they've got good scorers on a couple of different places from the roster. Obviously, kind of the big name in that game was Terrence Shannon Jr., who knows what his status will be on Saturday or how much he'll even play. But Kevin O'Banner also had a big game, as well as Bryson Williams, so those will be guys to watch for. But overall, this is a West Virginia team that Texas Tech is a little familiar with, and they've already seen once this season.
Yeah, and I think that first game in Lubbock was actually pretty impressive from West Virginia. If you look at the other teams that have come in conference play, I mean, Oklahoma State got blown out. Iowa State couldn't hang with Tech in the second half. And West Virginia played close all the way throughout. And I think that down the stretch, kind of some free throws and certainly TJ Shannon exploding in the second half kind of made the score look a lot more of a blowout than it actually was. But West Virginia was within 5 or 6 for most of that game. Certainly had a really big night from Taz Sherman. We're not sure if he's going to be playing on Saturday, but still, regardless, this is a team that was able to play Tech pretty close in Lubbock. And over the years in Morgantown, Tech has had some issues. They've obviously lost in 2017 in double overtime. That was the Keenan Evans game. Then they had 2018 loss for no one was there and no one was really playing healthy. In 2019, you had a close win over a team in West Virginia that ended up finishing last in the conference. And then 2020 was a free throw fest. 2021, you had Mac McClung and Deuce McBride just going toe-to-toe, and Deuce got the last laugh on that one. So you look at it, and Tech has only managed to win one of those games, and it was against probably the worst West Virginia team in the last decade and a half. So Morgantown's a difficult place to play. I think as well as that, you have two teams that like to play very tough brands of basketball, and that can mean that there's a lot of fouls. Certainly in the last game that benefited Tech. In the past in Morgantown, it's benefited West Virginia. So this is going to be a difficult matchup, even with the talent advantage that Tech has and with the fact that they've been the much better team this year. It's still a Big 12 road game. It's still a game against a team that's plenty capable of playing close and winning, and Tech's going to have to be on their A game, especially considering how much they've struggled in the past in Morgantown and how hungry West Virginia is going to be for a victory.
Yeah, I mean, there's no gimmies in the Big 12 at this point, even with the teams. Like, we ranked our Big 12 teams on our last episode, and I think I had West Virginia dead last. And this is still a game that you've got to be on high alert for. I mean, this is a team that can surprise you. And you look at it on paper, and you want to just get the bare bones. Like, you're looking at a team that has lost 6 games in a row. They're not going to have Taz Sherman. At least I don't think so. I don't think there's any way that he plays if the head injury he got was as serious as it looked. I mean, anything with concussion, he's probably looking at like a week out or something. So I'd be surprised if he played. So you're going in to your first 2-game road stand against a team that's dropped 6 straight. That's without their best player. You just had one of the most emotional and energy depleting games of your season. I mean, on paper, it feels like you could be walking into a little bit of a trap game. And I think that Texas Tech is a far more talented team than West Virginia. I think that this year Texas Tech just matches up really well with them and has the talent to win this game easily. But on paper, those factors, you've got to make sure that you don't lose your edge. And I have confidence that it should pan out well for Texas Tech, because if there's one thing that this team has been consistently this season, it's been well coached. But still, you've just got to factor in those other things and all the outside noise and make sure that you don't try and chalk this one up too early.
Yeah, I'm not overly concerned about there being a post-Texas game hangover. I think if Tech ends up losing this game somehow, then I think that it's going to be a popular narrative. But I have a lot of faith in how this team's been able to go through and win games right after the back of some kind of adversity or something happening. I mean, you look at how they responded to the loss to Providence. They came back and beat Tennessee in Madison Square Garden. Obviously, you had the close loss to Iowa State where they had 7 players, came back and beat Kansas. Followed up the Kansas win by winning against Baylor. Then after the Baylor game, 2 days later, they had to face off against the Oklahoma State team that really was riding a high after beating Texas on that weekend, if I remember correctly. And Tech just absolutely destroyed them. So really, like, the only times that Tech has lost this season, you would say that it's either when they've been in adverse conditions or they haven't had a reason to be like looking past their opponent. I mean, sure, the K-State game, people are going to say, oh, they were a bad team, one of the worst teams in the conference, and Tech managed to lose that one. But that was also different circumstances. You were playing the 4th game in 7 days. And really, even then, I don't think that was a case of overlooking K-State. I think that's just something where the legs were kind of tired. The shots weren't really falling. K-State had a couple really good shots go their way. And I think that I'm not worried about the team not being ready for this. I just think that going into Morgantown, that's a difficult place to play. Is probably the most difficult trip that you're going to have to take from a mileage standpoint and from an effect standpoint in conference play. And also it being a day game can kind of mess with some routines and stuff. So you've got a lot kind of working against you, and certainly not having Taz Sherman and them having probably a weaker roster across the board plays into Tech's favor. But still, I mean, this is still a good team. Like, it's better than any of the mid-major teams that Tech played in non-conference. And certainly we've seen in the past that Tech has been susceptible to playing teams close on the road. I mean, I just mentioned that Final Four team, the 2019 team, almost lost to the last place West Virginia team on the road. And that was a team that matched up probably really poorly with Tech because of the game in Lubbock, they got decimated and they had like no wing depth whatsoever on that team. So I mean, regardless of the matchups and regardless of the talent on the board, you still have to treat this as a very important game and a game that you can't afford to overlook and can't afford to have a poor showing in.
Some quick numbers for you right now. West Virginia is 58th in KenPom. They've got the 94th adjusted offense and the 37th adjusted defense. Pretty much the disparity that we saw earlier in the season where their defense was really keeping them in games. As you look at what they've been up to since Big 12 play, they pretty much rank in the bottom of the conference in really every single offensive metric. They're dead last in pure points per game, and their defense is actually dead last in pure points per game as well, which is not great. They're not shooting the ball super well. They get to the free throw line a lot. They're the best free throw shooting team in the Big 12 right now, I'd say. They don't move the ball very well. They're dead last in assists. Just not a ton to like in terms of the offensive numbers, but obviously there's some guys that can make you pay, and we'll dig into those names in our next segment. But first, a word from our sponsors. There might be less football being played, but betonline.net has way more stuff to bet on this playoff season. From scores, totals, playoff performance props to where the next fired coach is going to land, BetOnline is the #1 spot for all things NFL betting in 2022. And it's not just football. BetOnline.net's basketball, hockey, boxing, and UFC odds coverage is the best in the business. From sports right to your favorite Vegas casino games, BetOnline is your #1 online wagering destination. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to wager on all your favorite sports and play your favorite games. BetOnline, where the game starts. Hey Red Raiders, this is Ryan with an incredible app everyone who buys gas needs to know about, GetUpside. My listeners are earning cash back for every gallon of gas every time they fill up. Just download the free GetUpside app in the App Store or Google Play right now and use promo code SCORE for 25 cents per gallon cash back or more on your first fill up. Don't pay full price at the pump anymore. Get cash back using GetUpside. Just download the app for free and use promo code SCORE for 25 cents per gallon or more on your first tank. Some people who drive a lot are making as much as $200 to $300 a year in cash back, and there's no catch. The cash back gets added right to your account. You can cash out anytime to your bank account, PayPal, or an e-gift card for Amazon and other brands. Just download the free GetUpside app and use promo code SCORE to get 25 cents per gallon or more cash back on your first tank. That's code SCORE. Thanks for making Locked On Texas Tech your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms. We are here previewing West Virginia, who likely will be without Taz Sherman. Obviously, nothing official yet, but definitely something to monitor with Bob Huggins being willing to go on the record and call him questionable. Nonetheless, I mean, he did have a big game. The last time he was in Lubbock, scored 21, played just really, really good basketball, turned the ball over quite a bit, but in terms of a pure shot-making standpoint, he did Taz Sherman things. But another guy that's on this roster that, I mean, we previewed in our first episode, but we got to take a look at again, is Sean Mcneil, the sharpshooter who made Tech pay a couple of seasons ago. Only had 7 in their last matchup. He was just 2 for 7 from the field, 0 for 3 from deep. He hasn't been shooting the ball particularly well in his last 3 games, but against Baylor, he did have 16 and was a big, big part of just West Virginia really sticking around in that game longer than they probably should have. And so McNeil's a guy that's just a really pure shot maker, and he's a really, really talented player when he gets going.
Yeah, I mean, you look back at McNeil's game in Lubbock last year, and he ended up with 26 points in that one, hit 5 threes, and really was a critical piece because West Virginia actually didn't have Taz Sherman in that one. So if Sherman's unable to go, which by all indications seems like he probably will not be, then McNeil's going to have to take over a lot of the shot-making ability, and also he's going to have to act as more of a ball handler. And I mean, he's shown he's capable of doing that. He's had huge games in the past against Tech and against other teams as well. And that shot is so pure. And it's probably one of the best. He's one of the best shooters in the conference. Certainly on a catch and shoot basis, he's really good. But also off the dribble, I think he's deceptively good as well. His pull up obviously has really good range. But for McNeil, I think it's just being consistent, having good shot selection. That's something that really can be a hindrance for him at times. And then the first game, I thought he took generally good shots, but he just wasn't able to hit them. So I think Tech maybe got a little bit fortunate there. But certainly, if Sherman's unable to go, you're going to see a lot more McNeil in this game compared to what we saw in Lubbock, where he only took 3 threes. And I'd say even if Sherman is going, I think they're going to put more of an emphasis on getting the ball into his hands just because of how lethal he can be. And that's one of the biggest things that West Virginia did in the first game is they really weren't able to shoot a lot of threes. They only took 15 of them. And against a Tech team that's been so good at limiting players in the paint, I think that that's going to be a really important factor to watch. Is just how many threes West Virginia puts up and how much they're willing to trust McNeil. Because outside of him, they really don't have much shooting on the roster, especially if Sherman's not playing. Outside of him, you've really got Jalen Bridges, who can shoot the ball decently well, but he's a little bit streaky, and he's almost exclusively an off-ball guy. So you're just looking at a team that's pretty limited on the offensive side of things, and I think McNeil's going to be critical in this one just because if Sherman can't go, then he's going to have to be probably the main creator, and even if Sherman is able to go, his ability to hit outside shots and keep the defense honest is going to go a long way towards opening up space for some of their other drivers.
Yeah, they're going to need a lot from him in this game if they want to come away with a win. I mean, watching West Virginia this season, it's already clear that they just rely on Taz Sherman for so much of their offense. And McNeil is a really good player, but like you mentioned, he's primarily an off-ball guy. But that role is going to have to shift a little bit if you're without Sherman in this game, and they're just going to need a lot from McNeil. They are currently 7th in the Big 12 in 3-point attempts per game. As I mentioned earlier, they're a team that doesn't like to play on the perimeter primarily and really likes to get the ball inside. And McNeil is far and away their best shooter. I mean, I mentioned earlier that he's been struggling in his last 3 games, and he is still 15 of 33 from deep in Big 12 play, which is just incredible. So he's a guy that you've always got to account for, even though right now it may look like he's in a little bit of a cold stretch. Another guy that was really, really surprising, who I did not expect to have a big game against Texas Tech, but he showed up, man, and he got into the teeth of the Red Raiders defense. That was Malik Curry. I mean, a guy that we haven't seen a ton of from West Virginia this season. Even in their most recent game, he just played 4 minutes. But against Texas Tech, got to the free throw line 7 times and made all 7 of them. And again, this is the best free throw shooting team in the conference, one of the better free throw shooting teams in the country. You've got to watch out for individual free throw shooters and just guys that are going to want to play aggressive and get to the rim. I mean, you mentioned Bridges. I think he's missed 1 free throw this entire Big 12 slate, which is just ridiculous. But Malik Curry, he's got the ball handling ability to get the ball to the rim and really force the issue with the Texas Tech defense. And I mean, that's what we saw. He wasn't great from the field, just 2 for 7, protected the ball pretty well, had 2 assists to 1 turnover, but his ability to get to the free throw line, I thought, was a really, really nice counterpart to what Taz Sherman and Mcneil do on the offensive end.
Yeah, I think it's worth noting with Curry that he played a fair bit of primary ball handler when he was at at Old Dominion, and that set him up to where they really haven't utilized him as much as I would have anticipated them using him as a pure point, because he's not really much of a shooter, and even as a driver, while he's certainly good at getting the free throw line, his ability to finish at the rim is really good as well. He just hasn't really been able to establish himself as that pure ball handler, and I think that that's something that they're going to need from him in this game as well, especially, again, if Sherman's not playing, then you're going to have to distribute more of those ball handler minutes over to a guy like Malik Curry. And I find it really strange that he only played 4 minutes against Baylor. I mean, certainly the stats would indicate maybe he got into foul trouble. He had 3 fouls and a turnover. Maybe Bob Huggins did the good old trick and just decided to pull him, put him in the doghouse for that. But regardless, I mean, Curry's ability to get to the rim and certainly create for others is something that it's been something that's been lacking a little bit for West Virginia this season. And it's a skill set that he clearly has. He's shown in at Old Dominion, even if he's not a good shooter, and that always will limit his outcomes a little bit as a ball handler, it's still a weapon that they can utilize. And so his ability to get to the rim and get to the free throw line in that first game was really impressive. And I mean, if you're looking at potential X factors for West Virginia, he's the guy, because Mcneil's going to feature in the game plan. Sherman, if he's playing, is going to be in the game plan. And then they're going to have a couple of wings that really play good defense, and they're going to be more focused on just being there on the offensive side and being 4th and 5th options. So it's really just going to come down to how Curry can sort of get inside, because if he can drive well and create for others, that opens up a lot of opportunities for a guy like Mcneil that otherwise, without Sherman, potentially is going to have to be reliant on either creating his own shot off the dribble or can be focused on heavily by the Tech defense.
2 other guys I want to hit on real quick. Already briefly mentioned Jalen Bridges, but just a guy that kind of been a streaky shooter at times from deep. You don't really want him taking a ton of threes, but he'll shoot them, man. Has been really, really good at the free throw line, and then plays pretty solid defense on the perimeter and is a good rebounder as well. And then Cadreon Johnson, a guy that had a really forgettable performance in Lubbock. He went for 18 against Arkansas, and he just does not miss his free throws. Has only had 2 games this season when he scored in double digits, but a guy that I think with Taz Sherman potentially out could be a guy to watch for. Do you have anybody else you want to hit on?
Well, there's Gabo Saboyen, who has kind of struggled at points this season, and again in Lubbock really did not make me look very good. But he's going to be a defensive menace, and he might rack up a bunch of fouls, might play the Brock Cunningham role. But if you're looking at wing defenders, he's as good as they come across the nation. And for a team that features a guy like Bryson Williams and also someone like TJ Shannon, if they're both playing and healthy, especially on TJ's side, then Saboyen has the versatility to match up with both of them. And I think that's important. And then another guy that I wanted to touch on, someone that really hasn't played a whole lot this season, is Kobe Johnson. He's a guy, freshman this year, coming into West Virginia as a guard. And I think that he might not get a ton of minutes, but if Taz Sherman is not playing in this game, then it's going to force a guy like him to be more of a ball handler. And certainly we mentioned Malik Curry, and if Curry's still in the doghouse for whatever reason, then it might be Johnson that ends up with a 20-plus minute night. And really, he's not someone that's a particularly great shooter like Sherman is. He hasn't really shown a whole lot of playmaking chops, but he's also someone that can get to the rim, can play well. Obviously, hasn't really shot his free throws well. He's only taken 3 this whole season. But if you're looking looking for a guy that might be able to replace Sherman's production to some degree, I think Johnson's the guy to look out for.
Yeah, I mean, you got to account for really everybody on this roster. You never know what's going to happen whenever teams are trying to make up offensive losses. But coming up in our next segment, we will give you our keys to the game as well as our predictions and our final score guess. It's a new year, so that means New Year's resolutions. If yours are about getting fit or eating healthier, be sure that you include Built Bar in your plan. Built Bar is the protein bar that tastes like a candy bar, maybe even better than a candy bar. Built Bar makes it easier to stick to your resolutions because it tastes so good, you're going to want to eat it. It's not like other protein bars, which can be chalky or waxy or just taste like chemicals. You want to eat healthy, but it just gets so boring. By like week 3, you're probably thinking this just isn't worth it. Where's the chocolate? Guess what? Built Bars are covered in 100% real chocolate. And there are so many flavors to choose from: coconut almond, peanut butter brownie, raspberry, cookies and cream, salted caramel, mint brownie, and many more. In fact, Built is always coming out with new limited time flavors, so check out Built.com often to see what's new. Go to Built.com, use promo code LOCKED15 to get 15% off your order. That's promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com today. We are here previewing Texas Tech and West Virginia. Texas Tech will look to sweep the series, but they will have to go to Morgantown on Saturday at 1 p.m. to do so. Tough matchup, even with, Taz Sherman out potentially and somewhat of an off year for West Virginia. This is a tough place to play. It's always a tough team to play. And there are a couple of things that I think you've got to be careful not to overlook. One of them is just doing that in general. I mean, I mentioned the trap game at the beginning of this episode. I think you've just got to really dial in these next couple of days. Have a good couple of days of practice. Obviously, I'm not trying to say anything condescending about the attention or the hustle of this Texas Tech team. I believe that they're bought in. I believe that they're focused. I believe that they are competitive. You just got to be honest with what's in front of you and what you just came out of. I mean, sure, Texas Tech has proven that they can come back and win after some emotional games, but I'm not sure that anybody has ever played in a game that was as emotional as Tuesday night was. So just making sure that you're rested and recovered and that you come into Morgantown focused on going 1-0 on Saturday. But I think outside of that, just looking at the pure basketball standpoint, it really comes down to not sending West Virginia to the free throw line for me in this game. You're going to have guys that are going to be really aggressive. You're going to have Bridges, Mcneil, Curry that are going to try and force the issue and send themselves to the free throw line. And Texas Tech has allowed themselves to get beat there by West Virginia in recent years. And this West Virginia team can shoot the free throw really, really well. And I know that seems like just a really minor thing to be dialing in on as my key to the game. But with how poorly Texas Tech has shot free throws at times this season and how good West Virginia has looked from the charity stripe, you just got to force them to get their offense from somewhere else, especially if Sherman is out. This team does not have the offensive talent to beat you on paper, so don't give them the easy ones. Make them work every possession and show why you've got one of the best defenses in the country.
Yeah, I think keeping West Virginia from the foul line is going to be really critical in this one. I would say another key is going to be just crashing the offensive glass, getting after every loose ball, because one of the things West Virginia has really struggled with this year is defending the glass. They're a bottom 10 team in the nation at home in terms of allowing offensive rebounds from a rebounding percentage standpoint, and they're bottom 20 nationally throughout the season as a whole. So this is not a team that rebounds the ball well at all. And they don't really do a whole lot well defensively either, outside of the patented ball pressure that they've had at times. So really, if you can crash the offensive glass, it's going to help out a ton in this game. And that was something that played a factor in the first game. It wasn't quite as noticeable as I think people thought it might have been, just given West Virginia's numbers throughout the year. But that's the biggest thing for me, is offensively being able to crash the glass and exploit West Virginia's defense. And then as well as that, just taking care of the ball. And then on the defensive side of things, not messing up rotations. I know I've mentioned it a million times, but on the road, it can be a little bit more difficult to communicate, a little bit more difficult to stay in sync. And this isn't a particularly potent West Virginia shooting team. They've only really got one or two weapons, depending on if Sherman plays. And certainly Mcneil is going to be one guy you have to key in on. But outside of that, you've got Bridges, who's kind of a little bit hot and cold from deep. And then you've got a whole lot of guys that they're not really known for their shooting. So as a whole, I think that offensively is going to be where I have most of my keys laid in, because I think the offensive rebounding is the biggest advantage you could have in this game. And it's something that's won you games in this conference season. It's something that's lost West Virginia games. So that, and then taking care of the ball, will be the two things I'd be looking at.
Yeah, it feels weird to be watching a West Virginia team that's just really not great at rebounding and boxing out on the defensive end. I mean, that's been a huge Achilles heel for them. I'm looking at their game log. They've got, oh man, one, two, three. They've got 11 games where they've allowed 10 or more opponent offensive rebounds. I mean, that is just crazy. It was very, very apparent in the Texas Tech game that that was a big, big factor in a Red Raider victory. Texas Tech had 15. They just gave up 17 to Baylor. Those two teams actually, in the Texas Tech game and that Baylor game, they had the same exact defensive rebounding rate. So both of those teams were able to exploit the Mountaineers pretty well on the glass. But yeah, it's strange to be watching a Bob Huggins team that doesn't, live and die on the glass. And maybe you're wishing that, the Big O hadn't headed to Kentucky and he's looking like an All American this season. But nonetheless, this is the West Virginia team that we have. And man, I really feel confident that Mark Adams and his team will leave Morgantown with a victory. I'm not sure it'll be particularly close either. I'm going to pick Texas Tech winning this one 71-58. I just don't really buy into West Virginia's offense right now, especially with Taz Sherman either out or questionable or on a minutes restriction. I don't know, man. I just don't really see where this team will get their offense and where they'll be able to really capitalize on a Texas Tech defense that's already executed a really good game plan against them. So I've got Texas Tech winning this one 71-58. My player of the game is going to be Kevin O'Banner. I think he saw the shots go in against Texas, and I think that's going to be a big boost to his confidence going forward. This game, I think that West Virginia will really try and limit the paint after O'Banner and Williams really exploited them there in the last game. But I think that O'Banner will be able to stretch the floor and then capitalize on the offensive glass, as that's where West Virginia has been really, really weak lately.
Yeah, I'm going to go with a low-scoring game, and I think I have a couple main reasons for this. So one being that West Virginia at home this year has struggled offensively. They're actually worse at home offensively than they are on the road and at neutral sites, and that's something that really caught me by surprise, and really it's just been their inability to shoot the ball well, either from three-point range or from two-point range. So on their side, they've struggled to shoot, but they've obviously had good defensive games at home. They've had games against against Oklahoma State and UConn that were really impressive. But for the most part, their games have ended in the 50s and 60s. And then on Tech's end as well, they've been a lot worse on offense on the road compared to at home. Because outside of the Baylor game, they've really struggled to put performances together at home or on the road in conference play. Outside, obviously, you also had the Kansas game that now makes me look stupid for just saying that. But as a general rule this season, they've struggled a little bit more offensively. Certainly, you have the K-State game that comes to mind, the Providence game, were both games that they struggled with. And I just think that this environment in Morgantown, the last few years, with the exception of literally last year, the other years have been low-scoring games, generally speaking. You had a game where Tech struggled to put more than 54 points on the board 2 years ago. 3 years ago, we had the aforementioned game where it really took Jared Culver taking it over in the Final Four year. And against a West Virginia team that has seemingly been a lot better defensively at home and kind of worse offensively, I think is prime for a low-scoring output. But with all that said, and with Taz Sherman out, I'm going to guess that he's going to be out. I just can't see him coming back in 5 days. I think I'm going to go with Tech to win this one. It's going to be a dogfight. It's going to be a rock fight. It's probably not going to be particularly pretty, but I just think Tech's got a little bit more talent on the board. And even with the home court advantage that West Virginia has, I think that's not going to be quite enough. So I'll take Tech to win this one. I'm going to go really low scoring. I'm going to say it's going to be a 57-50 game. And for player of the game, I'm going to go a little bit unconventional. I think it's going to be Davion Warren. And I think that his ability to play on-ball defense against either Sean Mcneil or Malik Curry is going to be really critical. And then offensively, I mean, it's going to come down to just being able to get to the rim, being able to just really attack. And I think Warren, he's kind of been a little bit more in a supporting role this season, but he's also shown at times that he can be that guy they can get to the rim well. And this is a game where you can really utilize that strength. And I'm tempted to go with Bryson Williams or O'Banner just because of that offensive rebounding ability that I mentioned earlier. But at the same time, I just think that this is going to be a game where West Virginia is really going to be keying in on those guys, because in the first game, it was the offensive rebounds that probably lost them the game. And especially with O'Banner, he was really efficient on the inside. So I'll go with Warren as a player of the game. But in general, I think the guards are going to have a massive impact in terms of swinging this game one way or the other. So we'll see how it goes. I think Warren, Malik Wilson, Kevin McCullough, and then potentially Ronald Arms, and then obviously TJ Shannon if he's healthy. All of those guys are going to be important in terms of, on one end, making sure that guys like Malik Curry aren't really taking advantage of the defense and driving, and then on the other end, being able to take advantage of West Virginia probably putting a lot of emphasis on boxing out and making sure the bigs are contained.
That's a really, really interesting score prediction. That is much lower than I would have guessed. You know the last time Texas Tech scored less than 60 in a game this season?
Kansas State.
Iowa State.
Wait, they scored less than
Wait, no, they didn't. Sorry, I had my numbers flipped. You are indeed right. It was the Kansas State game. They scored 51, which was abysmal and very hard to watch. But that, again, that would be really surprising. But, I mean, it's possible. You look at Texas Tech's offense this season over the course of their whole season, they are averaging 109.7 points per 100 possessions. When you go to the road, that drops to 101.5. And out of 358 teams in Division I, they are currently 346th in three-point percentage on the road. Obviously, very small sample size. I think they've played 3 games on the road this year, 4 games on the road.
I think it's 5. I can check that real quick, but I'm pretty sure it's 5 games on the road, and they were 15.
Providence, Iowa State, Baylor, Kansas State, Kansas.
Yeah, and they're 15 points better at home offensively per 100 possessions than on the road. So that's a pretty stark contrast. Like, if you just took their offense at home, they'd be a top 15 offense nationally. But if you just took it on the road, they'd be like basically what VCU is this year.
Yeah. I mean, those are some gnarly drop-offs, and we'll have to see if Texas Tech can kind of right the ship after they've had one of the better last few stretches of really, man, that I can think of for this program really since 18-19. They've been killing it lately, but we will be back next week to break down the West Virginia victory. Hopefully it's not a rock fight. Hopefully I don't have to sit through just really, really boring basketball. I hope that Texas Tech just lights it up and gets another good win under their feet. Texas Tech, man, they'll be back on the road really, really quick, taking on Oklahoma on Tuesday. We will preview that game as well. In the meantime, you can keep up with us on socials. You can follow me at rmainvillelbk. You can follow Emery at eraser41, and you can follow the official Locked On Texas Tech Twitter at LockedOnTTU. Be sure to follow and subscribe to our feeds wherever you listen, and leave a review if possible. If you have not subscribed to our YouTube channel, you should do that right now. You can find us just by looking up our name, Locked On Texas Tech, in YouTube, and you will find our video probably of us recapping knocking off Chris Beard, which was bittersweet. And if you want to relive that moment, feel free to watch it. Thanks for making Locked On Texas Tech your first listen every day. And be sure to make your second listen Locked On Bets, your daily one-stop shop for all your gambling needs. Locked On Bets, hosted by your boy Q with expert analysis and insight from Lee Sterling. It's free and available on all platforms. Thank you for joining us. Have a great weekend, and we will see you.